The bravest will naturally get the best out of the new world. But there we seem undoubtedly to have touched on the crucial difficulty of my plan. Even if we succeeded in opening a world discussion on the Jewish question in a serious manner, even if this debate led us to a positive conclusion that the Jewish state were necessary to the world, even if the powers assisted us in acquiring the sovereignty over a strip of territory, how are we to transport masses of Jews without undue compulsion from their present homes to this new country? Their immigration is surely intended to be voluntary. The phenomenon of multitudes. Great exertions will hardly be necessary to spur on the movement. Anti-Semites provide the requisite impetus. They need only do what they did before, and then they will create a desire to emigrate where it did not previously exist, and strengthen it where it existed before. Jews who now remain in anti-Semitic countries do so chiefly because even those among them who are most ignorant of history know that numerous changes of residence in bygone centuries never brought them any permanent good. Any land which welcomed the Jews today, and offered them even fewer advantages than that which the Jewish state would guarantee them, would immediately attract a great influx of our people. The poorest, who have nothing to lose, would drag themselves there. But I maintain, and every man may ask himself whether I am not right, that the pressure weighing on us arouses a desire to emigrate even among prosperous strata of society. Now our poorest strata alone would suffice to found a state. These form the strongest human material for acquiring a land, because a little despair is indispensable to the formation of a great undertaking. But when our desperadoes increase the value of the land by their presence and by the labor they expend on it, they make it at the same time increasingly attractive as a place of settlement to people who are better off. Higher and yet higher strata will feel tempted to go over. The expedition of the first and poorest settlers will be conducted by company and society conjointly, and will probably be additionally supported by existing immigration and Zionist societies. How may a number of people be directed to a particular spot without being given express orders to go there? There are certain Jewish benefactors on a large scale who try to alleviate the sufferings of the Jews by Zionist experiments. To them this problem also presented itself, and they thought to solve it by giving the immigrants money or means of employment. Thus the philanthropists said, "We pay these people to go there." Such a procedure is utterly wrong, and all the money in the world will not achieve its purpose. On the other hand, the company will say, "We shall not pay them, we shall let them pay us. We shall merely offer them some inducements to go." A fanciful illustration will make my meaning more explicit. One of those philanthropists, whom we will call the Baron, and myself both wish to get a crowd of people onto the plain of Longchamps near Paris on a hot Sunday afternoon. The Baron, by promising them 10 francs each, will, for 200,000 francs, bring out 20,000 perspiring and miserable people, who will curse him for having given them so much annoyance. Whereas I will offer these 200,000 francs as a prize for the swiftest racehorse, and then I shall have to put up barriers to keep the people off Longchamps. They will pay to go in, 1 franc, 5 francs, 20 francs. The consequence will be that I shall get the 500,000 of people out there. The President of the Republic will drive up a la Daumont, and the crowds will enjoy and amuse themselves. Most of them will think it an agreeable walk in the open air in spite of heat and dust, and I shall have made by my 200,000 francs about 1,000,000 in entrance money and taxes on gaming. I shall get the same people out there whenever I like, but the Baron will not on any account. I will give a more serious illustration of the phenomenon of multitudes where they are earning a livelihood. Let any man attempt to cry through the streets of a town. Whoever is willing to stand all day long through a winter's terrible cold, through a summer's tormenting heat, in an iron hall exposed on all sides, there to address every passer-by, and to offer him fancy wares or fish or fruit, will receive 2 florins, or 4 francs or something similar. How many people would go to the hall? How many days would they hold out when hunger drove them there? And if they held out, what energy would they display in trying to persuade passers-by to buy fish, fruit, and fancy wares? We shall set about it in a different way. In places where trade is active, and these places we shall the more easily discover, since we ourselves direct trade whithersoever we wish, in these places we shall build large halls, and call them markets. These halls might be worse built and more unwholesome than those above mentioned, and yet people would stream towards them. But we shall use our best efforts, and we shall build them better, and make them more beautiful than the first. And the people, to whom we had promised nothing, because we cannot promise anything without deceiving them, these excellent, keen businessmen will gaily create most active commercial intercourse. They will harangue the buyers unweariedly. They will stand on their feet and scarcely think of fatigue. They will hurry off at dawn, so as to be first on the spot. They will form unions, cartels, anything to continue breadwinning undisturbed. And if they find at the end of the day that all their hard work has produced only 1 florin, 50 kreutzer, or 3 francs, or something similar, they will yet look forward hopefully to the next day, which may, perhaps, bring them better luck. We have given them hope. Would anyone ask whence the demand comes which creates the market? Is it really necessary to tell them again? I pointed out that by means of the system assistance par le travail the return could be increased 15-fold. 1 million would produce 15 millions, and 1,000 millions, 15,000 millions. This may be the case on a small scale. Is it so on a large one? Capital surely yields a return diminishing in inverse ratio to its own growth. Inactive and inert capital yields this diminishing return, but active capital brings in a marvelously increasing return. Herein lies the social question. Am I stating a fact? I call on the richest Jews as witnesses of my veracity. Why do they carry on so many different industries? Why do they send men to work underground and to raise coal amid terrible dangers for meager pay? I cannot imagine this to be pleasant, even for the owners of the mines. For I do not believe that capitalists are heartless, and I do not pretend that I believe it. My desire is not to accentuate, but to smooth differences. Is it necessary to illustrate the phenomenon of multitudes and their concentration on a particular spot by references to pious pilgrimages? I do not want to hurt anyone's religious sensibility by words which might be wrongly interpreted. I shall merely refer quite briefly to the Mohammedan pilgrimages to Mecca, the Catholic pilgrimages to Lourdes, and to many other spots whence men return comforted by their faith, and to the Holy Hock at Trier. Thus we shall also create a center for the deep religious needs of our people. Our ministers will understand us first, and will be with us in this. We shall let every man find salvation over there in his own particular way. Above and before all we shall make room for the immortal band of our freethinkers, who are continually making new conquests for humanity. No more force will be exercised on anyone than is necessary for the preservation of the state and order, and the requisite force will not be arbitrarily defined by one or more shifting authorities. It will be fixed by iron laws. Now, if the illustrations I gave make people draw the inference that a multitude can be only temporarily attracted to centers of faith, of business, or of amusement, the reply to their objection is simple. Whereas one of these objects by itself would certainly only attract the masses, all these centers of attraction combined would be calculated permanently to hold and satisfy them. For all these centers together form a single, great, long-sought object, which our people has always longed to attain, for which it has kept itself alive, for which it has been kept alive by external pressuria free home. When the movement commences, we shall draw some men after us and let others follow. Others again will be swept into the current, and the last will be thrust after us. These last hesitating settlers will be the worst off, both here and there. But the first, who go over with faith, enthusiasm, and courage will have the best positions. Our human material. There are more mistaken notions abroad concerning Jews than concerning any other people, and we have become so depressed and discouraged by our historic sufferings that we ourselves repeat and believe these mistakes. One of these is that we have an immoderate love of business. Now it is well known that wherever we are permitted to take part in the rising of classes, we give up our business as soon as possible. The great majority of Jewish businessmen give their sons a superior education. Hence, the so-called Judaizing of all intellectual professions. But even in economically feebler grades of society, our love of trade is not so predominant as is generally supposed. In the eastern countries of Europe, there are great numbers of Jews who are not traders, and who are not afraid of hard work either. The Society of Jews will be in a position to prepare scientifically accurate statistics of our human forces. The new tasks and prospects that await our people in the new country will satisfy our present handicraftsmen, and will transform many present small traders into manual workers. A peddler who travels about the country with a heavy pack on his back is not so contented as his persecutors imagine. The 7-hour day will convert all of his kind into workmen. They are good, misunderstood people, who now suffer perhaps more severely than any others. The Society of Jews will, moreover, busy itself from the outset with their training as artisans. Their love of gain will be encouraged in a healthy manner. Jews are of a thrifty and adaptable disposition, and are qualified for any means of earning a living, and it will therefore suffice to make small trading unremunerative, to cause even present peddlers to give it up altogether. This could be brought about, for example, by encouraging large department stores which provide all necessaries of life. These general stores are already crushing small trading in large cities. In a land of new civilization, they will absolutely prevent its existence. The establishment of these stores is further advantageous, because it makes the country immediately habitable for people who require more refined necessaries of life. Habits is a reference to the little habits and comforts of the ordinary man in keeping with the serious nature of this pamphlet. I think it is in keeping, and moreover, very important. For these little habits are the 1,001 fine delicate threads which together go to make up an unbreakable rope. Here certain limited notions must be set aside. Whoever has seen anything of the world knows that just these little daily customs can easily be transplanted everywhere. The technical contrivances of our day, which this scheme intends to employ in the service of humanity, have heretofore been principally used for our little habits. There are English hotels in Egypt and on the mountain crest in Switzerland, Vienna cafes in South Africa, French theaters in Russia, German operas in America, and best Bavarian beer in Paris. When we journey out of Egypt again, we shall not leave the fleshpots behind. Every man will find his customs again in the local groups, but they will be better, more beautiful, and more agreeable than before. V. Society of Jews and Jewish State. Negotiarum Gestio. This pamphlet is not intended for lawyers. I can therefore touch only cursorily, as on so many other things, upon my theory of the legal basis of a state. I must, nevertheless, lay some stress on my new theory, which could be maintained, I believe, even in discussion with men well versed in jurisprudence. According to Rousseau's now antiquated view, a state is formed by a social contract. Rousseau held that the conditions of this contract are so precisely defined by the nature of the agreement that the slightest alteration would make them null and void. The consequence is that, even where they are not expressly stated, they are everywhere identical, and everywhere tacitly accepted and recognized, etc. A logical and historic refutation of Rousseau's theory was never, nor is now, difficult, however terrible and far-reaching its effects may have been. The question whether a social contract with conditions not expressly stated, yet unalterable, existed before the framing of a constitution, is of no practical interest to states under modern forms of government. The legal relationship between government and citizen is in any case clearly established now. But previous to the framing of a constitution, and during the creation of a new state, these principles assume great practical importance. We know and see for ourselves that states still continue to be created. Colonies secede from the mother country. Vassals fall away from their suzerain. Newly opened territories are immediately formed into free states. It is true that the Jewish state is conceived as a peculiarly modern structure on unspecified territory, but a state is formed, not by pieces of land, but rather by a number of men united under sovereign rule. The people is the subjective, land the objective foundation of a state, and the subjective basis is the more important of the two. One sovereignty, for example, which has no objective basis at all, is perhaps the most respected one in the world. I refer to the sovereignty of the Pope. The theory of rationality is the one at present accepted in political science. This theory suffices to justify the creation of a state, and cannot be historically refuted in the same way as the theory of a contract. Insofar as I am concerned only with the creation of a Jewish state, I am well within the limits of the theory of rationality. But when I touch upon the legal basis of the state, I have exceeded them. The theories of a divine institution, or of superior power, or of a contract, and the patriarchal and patrimonial theories do not accord with modern views. The legal basis of a state is sought either too much within men, patriarchal theory, and theories of superior force and contract, or too far above them, divine institution, or too far below them, objective patrimonial theory? The theory of rationality leaves this question conveniently and carefully unanswered, but a question which has seriously occupied doctors of jurisprudence in every age cannot be an absolutely idle one. As a matter of fact, a mixture of human and superhuman goes to the making of a state. Some legal basis is indispensable to explain the somewhat oppressive relationship in which subjects occasionally stand to rulers. I believe it is to be found in the Negotiorum Gestio, wherein the body of citizens represents the dominus negotiorum and the government represents the gestor. The Romans, with their marvelous sense of justice, produced that noble masterpiece, the Negotiorum Gestio. When the property of an oppressed person is in danger, any man may step forward to save it. This man is the gestor, the director of affairs not strictly his own. He has received no warrant, that is, no human warrant. Higher obligations authorize him to act. The higher obligations may be formulated in different ways for the state, and so as to respond to individual degrees of culture attained by a growing general power of comprehension. The gestio is intended to work for the good of the dominus people, to whom the gestor himself belongs. The gestor administers property of which he is joint owner. His joint proprietorship teaches him what urgency would warrant his intervention and would demand his leadership in peace or war, but under no circumstances is his authority valid qua joint proprietorship. The consent of the numerous joint owners is even under most favorable conditions a matter of conjecture. A state is created by a nation's struggle for existence. In any such struggle, it is impossible to obtain proper authority in circumstantial fashion beforehand. In fact, any previous attempt to obtain a regular decision from the majority would probably ruin the undertaking from the outset. For internal schisms would make the people defenseless against external dangers. We cannot all be of one mind. The gestor will therefore simply take the leadership into his hands and march in the van. The action of the gestor of the state is sufficiently warranted if the common cause is in danger, and the dominus is prevented, either by want of will or by some other reason, from helping itself. But the gestor becomes similar to the dominus by his intervention, and is bound by the agreement quasi ex contractu. This is the legal relationship existing before, or, more correctly, created simultaneously with the state. The gestor thus becomes answerable for every form of negligence, even for the failure of business undertakings, and the neglect of such affairs as are intimately connected with them, etc. I shall not further enlarge on the Negotiorum Gestio, but rather leave it to the state, else it would take us too far from the main subject. One remark only: business management, if it is approved by the owner, is just as effectual as if it had originally been carried on by his authority. And how does all this affect our case? The Jewish people are at present prevented by the diaspora from conducting their political affairs themselves. Besides, they are in a condition of more or less severe distress in many parts of the world. They need, above all things, a gestor. This gestor cannot, of course, be a single individual. Such a one would either make himself ridiculous, or seeing that he would appear to be working for his own interests contemptible. The gestor of the Jews must therefore be a body corporate, and that is the Society of Jews. The gestor of the Jews. This organ of the national movement, the nature and functions of which we are at last dealing with, will, in fact, be created before everything else. Its formation is perfectly simple. It will take shape among those energetic Jews to whom I imparted my scheme in London. b. The society will have scientific and political tasks, for the founding of a Jewish state, as I conceive it, presupposes the application of scientific methods. We cannot journey out of Egypt today in the primitive fashion of ancient times. We shall previously obtain an accurate account of our number and strength. The undertaking of that great and ancient gestor of the Jews in primitive days bears much the same relation to ours that some wonderful melody bears to a modern opera. We are playing the same melody with many more violins, flutes, harps, violoncellos, and bass viols, with electric light, decorations, choirs, beautiful costumes, and with the first singers of their day. This pamphlet is intended to open a general discussion on the Jewish question. Friends and foes will take part in it, but it will no longer, I hope, take the form of violent abuse or of sentimental vindication, but of a debate, practical, large, earnest, and political. The Society of Jews will gather all available declarations of statesmen, parliaments, Jewish communities, societies, whether expressed in speeches or writings, in meetings, newspapers, or books. Thus the society will find out for the first time whether the Jews really wish to go to the Promised Land, and whether they must go there. Every Jewish community in the world will send contributions to the society towards a comprehensive collection of Jewish statistics. Further tasks, such as investigation by experts of the new country and its natural resources, the uniform planning of migration and settlement, preliminary work for legislation and administration, etc., must be rationally evolved out of the original scheme. Externally, the society will attempt, as I explained before in the general part, to be acknowledged as a state-forming power. The free assent of many Jews will confer on it the requisite authority in its relations with governments. Internally, that is to say, in its relation with the Jewish people, the society will create all the first indispensable institutions. It will be the nucleus out of which the public institutions of the Jewish state will later on be developed. Our first object is, as I said before, supremacy, assured to us by international law, over a portion of the globe sufficiently large to satisfy our just requirements. What is the next step? The occupation of the land. When nations wandered in historic times, they let chance carry them, draw them, fling them hither and thither, and like swarms of locusts they settled down indifferently anywhere. For in historic times the earth was not known to man. But this modern Jewish migration must proceed in accordance with scientific principles. Not more than 40 years ago gold digging was carried on in an extraordinarily primitive fashion. What adventurous days were those in California! A report brought desperados together from every quarter of the earth. They stole pieces of land, robbed each other of gold, and finally gambled it away, as robbers do. But today, what is gold digging like in the Transvaal today? Adventurous vagabonds are not there. Sedate geologists and engineers alone are on the spot to regulate its gold industry and to employ ingenious machinery in separating the ore from surrounding rock. Little is left to chance now. Thus we must investigate and take possession of the new Jewish country by means of every modern expedient. As soon as we have secured the land, we shall send over a ship, having on board the representatives of the society, of the company, and of the local groups, who will enter into possession at once. These men will have 3 tasks to perform. 1. An accurate, scientific investigation of all natural resources of the country. 2. The organization of a strictly centralized administration. 3. The distribution of land. These tasks intersect one another, and will all be carried out in conformity with the now familiar object in view. One thing remains to be explained, namely, how the occupation of land according to local groups is to take place. In America, the occupation of newly opened territory is set about in naive fashion. The settlers assemble on the frontier, and at the appointed time make a simultaneous and violent rush for their portions. We shall not proceed thus to the new land of the Jews. The lots and provinces and towns will be sold by auction and paid for, not in money, but in work. The general plan will have settled on streets, bridges, waterworks, etc., necessary for traffic. These will be united into provinces. Within these provinces, sites for towns will be similarly sold by auction. The local groups will pledge themselves to carry the business property through, and will cover the cost by means of self-imposed assessments. The society will be in a position to judge whether the local groups are not venturing on sacrifices too great for their means. The large communities will receive large sites for their activity. Great sacrifices will thus be rewarded by the establishment of universities, technical schools, academies, research institutes, etc., and these government institutes, which do not have to be concentrated in the capital, will be distributed over the country. The personal interest of the buyers, and, if necessary, the local assessment, will guarantee the proper working of what has been taken over. In the same way, as we cannot, and indeed do not wish to obliterate distinctions between single individuals, so the differences between local groups will also continue. Everything will shape itself quite naturally. All acquired rights will be protected, and every new development will be given sufficient scope. Our people will be made thoroughly acquainted with all these matters. We shall not take others unawares or mislead them, any more than we shall deceive ourselves. Everything must be systematically settled beforehand. I merely indicate this scheme. Our keenest thinkers will combine in elaborating it. Every social and technical achievement of our age, and of the more advanced age, which will be reached before the slow execution of my plan, is accomplished must be employed for this object. Every valuable invention which exists now, or lies in the future, must be used. By these means a country can be occupied and a state founded in a manner as yet unknown to history, and with possibilities of success such as never occurred before. Constitution. One of the great commissions which the society will have to appoint will be the Council of State Jurists. These must formulate the best, that is, the best modern constitution possible. I believe that a good constitution should be of moderately elastic nature. In another work I have explained in detail what forms of government I hold to be the best. I think a democratic monarchy and an aristocratic republic are the finest forms of a state, because in them the form of state and the principle of government are opposed to each other, and thus preserve a true balance of power. I am a staunch supporter of monarchical institutions, because these allow of a continuous policy, and represent the interests of a historically famous family born and educated to rule, whose desires are bound up with the preservation of the state. But our history has been too long interrupted for us to attempt direct continuity of ancient constitutional forms, without exposing ourselves to the charge of absurdity. A democracy without a sovereign's useful counterpoise is extreme in appreciation and condemnation, tends to idle discussion in parliaments, and produces that objectionable class of men-professional politicians. Nations are also really not fit for unlimited democracy at present, and will become less and less fitted for it in the future. For a pure democracy presupposes a predominance of simple customs, and our customs become daily more complex with the growth of commerce and increase of culture.
Le ressort d'une démocratique est la vertu, said Louise Montesquieu.
And where is this virtue, that is to say, this political virtue, to be met with? I do not believe in our political virtue. First, because we are no better than the rest of modern humanity. And, secondly, because freedom will make us show our fighting qualities at first. I also hold a settling of questions by the referendum to be an unsatisfactory procedure, because there are no simple political questions which can be answered merely by yes and no. The masses are also more prone even than parliaments to be led away by heterodox opinions, and to be swayed by vigorous ranting. It is impossible to formulate a wise internal or external policy in a popular assembly. Politics must take shape in the upper strata and work downwards. But no member of the Jewish state will be oppressed. Every man will be able and will wish to rise in it. Thus a great upward tendency will pass through our people. Every individual by trying to raise himself, raising also the whole body of citizens. The ascent will take a normal form, useful to the state and serviceable to the national idea. Hence I incline to an aristocratic republic. This would satisfy the ambitious spirit in our people, which has now degenerated into petty vanity. Many of the institutions of Venice pass through my mind, but all that which caused the ruin of Venice must be carefully avoided. We shall learn from the historic mistakes of others, in the same way as we learn from our own. For we are a modern nation, and wish to be the most modern in the world. Our people, who are receiving the new country from the society, will also thankfully accept the new constitution it offers them. Should any opposition manifest itself, the society will suppress it. The society cannot permit the exercise of its functions to be interpreted by short-sighted or ill-disposed individuals. Language. It might be suggested that our want of a common current language would present difficulties. We cannot converse with one another in Hebrew. Who amongst us has a sufficient acquaintance with Hebrew to ask for a railway ticket in that language? Such a thing cannot be done. Yet the difficulty is very easily circumvented. Every man can preserve the language in which his thoughts are at home. Switzerland affords a conclusive proof of the possibility of a federation of tongues. We shall remain in the new country what we now are here, and we shall never cease to cherish with sadness the memory of the native land out of which we have been driven. We shall give up using those miserable stunted jargons, those ghetto languages which we still employ, for these were the stealthy tongues of prisoners. Our national teachers will give due attention to this matter, and the language which proves itself to be of greatest utility for general intercourse will be adopted without compulsion as our national tongue. Our community of race is peculiar and unique, for we are bound together only by the faith of our fathers. Theocracy. Shall we end by having a theocracy? No, indeed. Faith unites us. Knowledge gives us freedom. We shall therefore prevent any theocratic tendencies from coming to the fore on the part of our priesthood. We shall keep our priests within the confines of their temples in the same way as we shall keep our professional army within the confines of their barracks. Army and priesthood shall receive honors high as their valuable functions deserve. But they must not interfere in the administration of the state which confers distinction upon them, else they will conjure up difficulties without and within. Every man will be as free and undisturbed in his faith, or his disbelief, as he is in his nationality. And if it should occur that men of other creeds and different nationalities come to live amongst us, we should accord them honorable protection and equality before the law. We have learnt toleration in Europe. This is not sarcastically said, for the anti-Semitism of today could only in a very few places be taken for old religious intolerance. It is for the most part a movement among civilized nations by which they try to chase away the specters of their own past. Laws. When the idea of a state begins to approach realization, the Society of Jews will appoint a council of jurists to do the preparatory work of legislation. During the transition period, these must act on the principle that every immigrant Jew is to be judged according to the laws of the country which he has left. But they must try to bring about a unification of these various laws to form a modern system of legislation based on the best portions of previous systems. This might become a typical codification, embodying all the just social claims of the present day. The army. The Jewish state is conceived as a neutral one. It will therefore require only a professional army, equipped, of course, with every requisite of modern warfare, to preserve order internally and externally. The flag. We have no flag, and we need one. If we desire to lead many men, we must raise a symbol above their heads. I would suggest a white flag, with 7 golden stars. The white field symbolizes our pure new life. The stars are the 7 golden hours of our working day. For we shall march into the promised land carrying the badge of honor. Reciprocity and extradition treaties. The new Jewish state must be properly founded, with due regard to our future honorable position in the world. Therefore, every obligation in the old country must be scrupulously fulfilled before leaving. The Society of Jews and the Jewish Company will grant cheap passage and certain advantages in settlement to those only who can present an official testimonial from the local authorities, certifying that they have left their affairs in good order. Every just private claim originating in the abandoned countries will be heard more readily in the Jewish state than anywhere else. We shall not wait for reciprocity. We shall act purely for the sake of our own honor. We shall thus perhaps find, later on, that law courts will be more willing to hear our claims than now seems to be the case in some places. It will be inferred, as a matter of course, from previous remarks, that we shall deliver up Jewish criminals more readily than any other state would do, till the time comes when we can enforce our penal code on the same principles as every other civilized nation does. There will therefore be a period of transition, during which we shall receive our criminals only after they have suffered due penalties. But, having made amends, they will be received without any restrictions whatever, for our criminals also must enter upon a new life. Thus immigration may become to many Jews a crisis with a happy issue. Bad external circumstances, which ruin many a character, will be removed, and this change may mean salvation to many who are lost. Here I should like briefly to relate a story I came across in an account of the gold mines of Witwatersrand. One day a man came to the Rand, settled there, tried his hand at various things, with the exception of gold mining, till he founded an ice factory, which did well. He soon won universal esteem by his respectability, but after some years he was suddenly arrested. He had committed some defalcations as banker in Frankfurt, had fled from there, and had begun a new life under an assumed name. But when he was led away as prisoner, the most respected people in the place appeared at the station, bade him a cordial farewell, and au revoir, for he was certain to return. How much this story reveals! A new life can regenerate even criminals, and we have a proportionately small number of these. Some interesting statistics on this point are worth reading, entitled The Criminality of Jews in Germany, by Dr. P. Nathan, of Berlin, who was commissioned by the Society for Defense Against Anti-Semitism to make a collection of statistics based on official returns. It is true that this pamphlet, which teems with figures, has been prompted, as many another defense, by the error that anti-Semitism can be refuted by reasonable arguments. We are probably disliked as much for our gifts as we are for our faults. Benefits of the immigration of the Jews. I imagine that governments will, either voluntarily or under pressure from the anti-Semites, pay certain attention to this scheme, and they may perhaps actually receive it here and there with a sympathy which they will also show to the Society of Jews. For the immigration which I suggest will not create any economic crises. Such crises as would follow everywhere in consequence of Jew baiting would rather be prevented by the carrying out of my plan. A great period of prosperity would commence in countries which are now anti-Semitic. For there will be, as I have repeatedly said, an internal migration of Christian citizens into the positions slowly and systematically evacuated by the Jews. If we are not merely suffered, but actually assisted to do this, the movement will have a generally beneficial effect. That is a narrow view, from which one should free oneself, which sees in the departure of many Jews a consequent impoverishment of countries. It is different from a departure which is a result of persecution, for then property is indeed destroyed, as it is ruined in the confusion of war. Different again is the peaceable voluntary departure of colonists, wherein everything is carried out with due consideration for acquired rights, and with absolute conformity to law, openly and by light of day, under the eyes of the authorities and the control of public opinion. The emigration of Christian proletarians to different parts of the world would be brought to a standstill by the Jewish movement. The states would have a further advantage in the enormous increase of their export trade. For, since the emigrant Jews over there would depend for a long time to come on European productions, they would necessarily have to import them. The local groups would keep up a just balance, and the customary needs would have to be supplied for a long time at the accustomed places. Another, and perhaps one of the greatest advantages, would be the ensuing social relief. Social dissatisfaction would be appeased during the 20 or more years which the emigration of the Jews would occupy, and would in any case be set at rest during the whole transition period. The shape which the social question may take depends entirely on the development of our technical resources. Steam power concentrated men in factories about machinery where they were overcrowded, and where they made one another miserable by overcrowding. Our present enormous, injudicious, and unsystematic rate of production is the cause of continual severe crises which ruin both employers and employees. Steam crowded men together. Electricity will probably scatter them again, and may perhaps bring about a more prosperous condition of the labor market. In any case, our technical inventors, who are the true benefactors of humanity, will continue their labors after the commencement of the emigration of the Jews, and they will discover things as marvelous as those we have already seen, or indeed more wonderful even than these. The word impossible has ceased to exist in the vocabulary of technical science. Were a man who lived in the last century to return to the earth, he would find the life of today full of incomprehensible magic. Wherever the moderns appear with our inventions, we transform the desert into a garden. To build a city takes in our time as many years as it formerly required centuries. America offers endless examples of this. Distance has ceased to be an obstacle. The spirit of our age has gathered fabulous treasures into its storehouse. Every day this wealth increases. 100,000 heads are occupied with speculations and research at every point of the globe, and what anyone discovers belongs the next moment to the whole world. We ourselves will use and carry on every new attempt in our Jewish land. And just as we shall introduce the 7-hour day as an experiment for the good of humanity, so we shall proceed in everything else in the same humane spirit, making of the new land a land of experiments and a model state. After the departure of the Jews, the undertakings which they have created will remain where they originally were found, and the Jewish spirit of enterprise will not even fail where people welcome it. For Jewish capitalists will be glad to invest their funds where they are familiar with surrounding conditions. And whereas Jewish money is now sent out of countries on account of existing persecutions, and is sunk in most distant foreign undertakings, it will flow back again in consequence of this peaceable solution, and will contribute to the further progress of the countries which the Jews have left. Footnotes. Dr. Herzl addressed a meeting of the Maccabean Club, at which Israel Zangwill presided, on November 24, 1895. 6. Conclusion. How much has been left unexplained? How many defects? How many harmful superficialities? And how many useless repetitions in this pamphlet, which I have thought over so long and so often revised? But a fair-minded reader, who has sufficient understanding to grasp the spirit of my words, will not be repelled by these defects. He will rather be roused thereby to cooperate with his intelligence and energy in a work which is not one man's task alone, and to improve it. Have I not explained obvious things and overlooked important objections? I have tried to meet certain objections, but I know that many more will be made, based on high grounds and low. To the first class of objections belongs the remark that the Jews are not the only people in the world who are in a condition of distress. Here I would reply that we may as well begin by removing a little of this misery, even if it should at first be no more than our own. It might further be said that we ought not to create new distinctions between people. We ought not to raise fresh barriers, we should rather make the old disappear. But men who think in this way are amiable visionaries, and the idea of a native land will still flourish when the dust of their bones will have vanished tracelessly in the winds. Universal brotherhood is not even a beautiful dream. Antagonism is essential to man's greatest efforts. But the Jews, once settled in their own state, would probably have no more enemies. As for those who remain behind, since prosperity enfeebles and causes them to diminish, they would soon disappear altogether. I think the Jews will always have sufficient enemies, such as every nation has. But once fixed in their own land, it will no longer be possible for them to scatter all over the world. The diaspora cannot be reborn, unless the civilization of the whole earth should collapse, and such a consummation could be feared by none but foolish men. Our present civilization possesses weapons powerful enough for its self-defense. Innumerable objections will be based on low grounds, for there are more low men than noble in this world. I have tried to remove some of these narrow-minded notions, and whoever is willing to fall in behind our white flag with its 7 stars must assist in this campaign of enlightenment. Perhaps we shall have to fight first of all against many an evil-disposed, narrow-hearted, short-sighted member of our own race. Again, people will say that I am furnishing the anti-Semites with weapons. Why so? Because I admit the truth? Because I do not maintain that there are none but excellent men against us? Will not people say that I am showing our enemies the way to injure us? This I absolutely dispute. My proposal could only be carried out with the free consent of a majority of Jews. Action may be taken against individuals or even against groups of the most powerful Jews, but governments will never take action against all Jews. The equal rights of the Jew before the law cannot be withdrawn where they have once been conceded. For the first attempt at withdrawal would immediately drive all Jews, rich and poor alike, into the ranks of revolutionary parties. The beginning of any official acts of injustice against the Jews invariably brings about economic crises. Therefore, no weapons can be effectually used against us, because these injure the hands that wield them. Meantime, hatred grows apace. The rich do not feel it much, but our poor do. Let us ask our poor, who have been more severely proletarized since the last removal of anti-Semitism than ever before. Some of our prosperous men may say that the pressure is not yet severe enough to justify emigration, and that every forcible expulsion shows how unwilling our people are to depart. True, because they do not know where to go, because they only pass from one trouble into another. But we are showing them the way to the promised land, and the splendid force of enthusiasm must fight against the terrible force of habit. Persecutions are no longer so malignant as they were in the Middle Ages. True, but our sensitiveness has increased, so that we feel no diminution in our sufferings. Prolonged persecution has overstrained our nerves. Will people say, again, that our enterprise is hopeless, because even if we obtained the land with supremacy over it, the poor only would go with us? It is precisely the poorest whom we need at first. Only the desperate make good conquerors. Will someone say, were it feasible it would have been done long ago? It has never yet been possible. Now it is possible. 100 or even 50 years ago, it would have been nothing more than a dream. Today it may become a reality. Our rich, who have a pleasurable acquaintance with all our technical achievements, know full well how much money can do. And thus it will be, just the poor and simple, who do not know what power man already exercises over the forces of nature. Just these will have the firmest faith in the new message. For these have never lost their hope of the promised land. Here it is, fellow Jews. Neither fable nor deception. Every man may test its reality for himself, for every man will carry over with him a portion of the promised land, one in his head, another in his arms, another in his acquired possessions. Now, all this may appear to be an interminably long affair. Even in the most favorable circumstances, many years might elapse before the commencement of the foundation of the state. In the meantime, Jews in 1,000 different places would suffer insults, mortifications, abuse, blows, depredation, and death. No. If we only begin to carry out the plans, anti-Semitism would stop at once and forever. For it is the conclusion of peace. The news of the formation of our Jewish company will be carried in a single day to the remotest ends of the earth by the lightning speed of our telegraph wires. An immediate relief will ensue. The intellects which we produce so superabundantly in our middle classes will find an outlet in our first organizations, as our first technicians, officers, professors, officials, lawyers, and doctors. And thus the movement will continue in swift but smooth progression. Prayers will be offered up for the success of our work in temples and in churches also, for it will bring relief from an old burden which all have suffered. But we must first bring enlightenment to men's minds. The idea must make its way into the most distant, miserable holes where our people dwell. They will awaken from gloomy brooding, for into their lives will come a new significance. Every man need think only of himself, and the movement will assume vast proportions. And what glory awaits those who fight unselfishly for the cause. Therefore I believe that a wondrous generation of Jews will spring into existence. The Maccabeans will rise again. Let me repeat once more my opening words. The Jews who wish for a state will have it. We shall live at last as free men on our own soil, and die peacefully in our own homes. The world will be freed by our liberty, enriched by our wealth, magnified by our greatness. And whatever we attempt there to accomplish for our own welfare will react powerfully and beneficially for the good of humanity. Bibliography. The Congress Addresses. New York, Federation of American Zionists, 1917. 40 p. Excerpts from Herzl's Diaries. New York, Scopus Pub. Company 1941. 122 p.
Gesammelte Schriften, in Yiddish.
New York, Literarische Verlag. 1920. 2 volumes.
Gesammelte zionistische Werke.
3rd edition Berlin. Jüdischer Verlag. 1934.
5 vols. Contents, vol. Zionistische Schriften, vol. 2, 3, 4, Tagebücher, vol. 5 Das neue Ghetto, Altneuland, aus dem Nachlass. Das Judenstaat, Versuch einer modernen Lösung der Judenfrage. Neue Auflage mit einem Vorwort von Otto Warburg. Berlin, Jüdischer Verlag, 1918.
88 p. Various editions. Old New Land Tr. by Lotta Levinson with a preface by Stephen S. Wise. New York, Block Pub. Company 1941. 296 p. The Tragedy of Jewish Immigration. 2nd edition. New York, Zionist Organization of America, 1920. 47 p. About Theodor Herzl. Bean, Alex. Theodor Herzl Tr. by Maurice Samuel. Phil. Jewish. Pub. Society, 1940. 545 p.
Bruinin, Ruben.
A Life of Herzl. Volume 1. New York, 1919. Hebrew. Buber, Martin and Welch, Robert. Theodor Herzl and We. New York, Heiligtuth of America, 1929. 28 p. De Haas, Jacob. Theodor Herzl, A Biographical Study. New York, 1927. 2 volumes. Hoffman, Martha. The Young Herzl, in Hebrew, Jerusalem, 1941. 103 p.
Neumann, Emanuel.
The Birth of Statesmanship. A Story of Theodor Herzl's Life, New York, Youth Department Jewish National Fund of America. 48 p. New Palestine. Theodor Herzl, A Memorial, edition by Meyer W. Weisgau. New York, 1929. 320p. Zionist Organization Executive.
Theodor Herzl, ein Gedenkbuch. Berlin, Jüdischer Verlag, 1929.
79p. Chronology. 1860 May 2 Wolf Theodor, Benjamin Zev, Herzl is born in the Tabagas, Budapest, the son of Jacob and Jeanette, Diamond, Herzl. 1885 May 27, first feuilleton, published in Wiener Allgemeine Zeitung. 1894 October 21 Arrest of Dreyfus.
Okte. 21 Nov 8 Vritis das neue Ghetto.
This is an attempt to express himself on the Jewish question. 1895 June 2 interviews Baron de Hirsch, submits plan for political action. Not favorably received. Immediately after this interview, which he later designates the beginning of his Zionist work, Herzl begins his diaries. June-July composes first draft of Der Judenstaat. November 17 explains idea of Jewish state to Dr. Nordau in Paris. Meets with instant understanding. Nordau gives Herzl introduction to Zangwill and London Maccabean Club. November 21 London. First meeting with Zangwill. 1895 NOV. 24 London. First address before Maccabean Club. 1896 February. 14 Der Judenstaat published in Vienna. May Herzl recognized as leader by Zionist students of Vienna. July 13 London. Proclaimed leader of Jewry at meeting of Whitechapel Jews. Conflict with Shovavai Zion. July 18 Paris. Meeting with Baron Edmund Rothschild, who considers plan impracticable. November 8 writes to British Zionists suggesting collection of a national fund. 1897 March 6 Zionsverein decides upon Zionist Congress in Munich on August 25. June 4 publication of first issue of Die Welt. June 17 Zionist Actions Committee decides to hold Congress in Ball. August 29-31 First Zionist Congress convenes in Ball. 1898 August 2832nd Zionist Congress meets at Ball. October 26 Herzl Party lands at Jaffa. Tours Jewish colonies of Palestine. November 2 formal audience with German Emperor at his headquarters outside Jerusalem. Problems of colonization discussed. 1899 March 20 registration of name of Jewish Colonial Trust, Ltd. August 15-17 Third Zionist Congress held at Ball. 1900 August 2 Fourth Zionist Congress opens in London. Herzl attends though he has barely recovered from serious illness. 1901 May 18 formal audience with Abdul Hamid II at Yildiz Kiosk. Herzl is promised pro-Jewish proclamation. Receives Grand Cordon of the Order of Medjid, First Class. December 29, 31 Fifth Congress convenes at Ball. Zangwill attacks ICA. Conflict between Herzl and Russian cultural Zionists. Discussion of National Fund. 1902 February. 17 Constantinople. Sultan offers Herzl charter, but not for Palestine. July 5 London. Conference with Lord Rothschild. July 7 London. Herzl appears before Royal Commission on Alien Immigration. October publication of Alt Newland. 1903 Jan. El Arish expedition organized. May 11 permission for El Arish colonization refused by Egypt. August 16 Vilna. Great ovations. There receives letter from Sir Clement Hill of British Foreign Office offering Uganda. August 22-28 Sixth Zionist Congress held at Ball. Uganda conflict. 1904 May 16 last entry in diary's letter to Schiff. July 3 death of Theodor Herzl.